I never thought much of monsters until the ordeal with my son Chris. Me and my wife were always strict about bedtime, but when it came to it, we couldn't refuse his puppy eyes. So after playing his games for about an hour, after bedtime, my wife had had enough, so I sent him to bed. I began tucking him in, and he tells me, "Daddy, check under my bed for monsters." I look underneath for his amusement, and see him, another him, staring back at me, quivering, and he whispers, "Daddy, there's someone on my bed." I froze in shock, stuttered, and scrambled backwards until I hit the wall. My mind was swimming, I couldn't think straight. But as my mind finally pulled me back to reality, I realized that my son, even if it was my son, had a fearful and bewildered stare, locking with mine. I broke the stare quickly and nervously glanced under the bed, and to my horror, he was gone. As my brain tried to rationalize the situation, the lights went out. I couldn't see a thing, and the worst happened. I heard a loud, booming voice echoing through the house.
"You found me. Now I'm going to find you."
I frantically looked around for a light source, and then I remembered my son's little explorer's torch on the windowsill. I stumbled over to it, although I was hesitant to go near the bed. I opened the curtains and saw that thing standing in an uncomfortable position, hunched over something. I stared in terror for what seemed like an eternity, until the silence was finally broken by the sound of bones shattering under a heavy weight. The thing turned around slowly to reveal two perfect white orbs for what you would call eyes, and blood smeared across its face. I noticed in its hand he was holding the neighbour's dog's head, and the bloody remains in the other, almost as if he was displaying his prize. I looked back up from the dog to notice his eyes had locked with mine. Voices began to erupt in my head, the same words repeated over and over, almost like a chant. I blinked, and he was gone. I heard a window shatter and my wife scream. I picked up the torch and went to go downstairs, until I remembered I wasn't armed. I darted into my bedroom and grabbed my granddad's old war knife. Then I ran downstairs to the source of the noise. It was coming from my living room. I desperately tried the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. So I did the only thing I thought necessary. I kicked it in, only to find my wife cradled over my son. His head was bleeding pretty badly, and from a distance, I couldn't spot any apparent wounds. I flicked on the torch and started walking to him in great relief. But as I drew closer, my relief turned to dismay. The torch beam I aimed at my son was burning through his arm, emitting a deep black smoke. Before I could react, he opened his eyes and displayed two perfectly white orbs. He grabbed my wife by the neck, and as he turned into his monstrous form, I decided to act. I lunged toward the creature and swiped my knife clean through his arm. To my surprise, the knife went straight through and smoke trickled out from where I supposedly cut him. Before I could say anything, the smoke bridged and his arm became complete again. He laughed a horrible, sadistic laugh and threw my wife to the ground. It then started maniacally laughing as it turned to face me. It bore its unnatural teeth as it lunged at me. He pinned me to the ground and started breathing heavily as blood fell onto my face. I felt a warm sensation wash over my lower torso, but as I looked down, my granddad's old knife was protruding from the center of my stomach. He stands above me and booms,
"I am darkness, you mortals know it. I am what you are scared of. You have learned to fear me. I am deaf. I am fear. I am night as you know it.
He spreads his arms outwards as smoke engulfed the room, making it impossible to see or hear as my ears rung. Before I blacked out, nothing but screams filled my head. The final words I hear were,
I found you.
I awoke in a hospital bed. Dazed and confused, I flailed around, but as I did, a passing nurse came running toward me. She calmly stated, "Mr. Johnson, you need to calm down. The sheriff is coming now you're awake. He's coming to speak to you." A few minutes passed, and he arrived. I don't know how to put this lightly, but we found your door ripped off its hinges and your window smashed. You had been stabbed and were bleeding heavily against a wall. Your wife had been murdered. She had been mutilated beyond recognition. We found the bulk of her body in the living room. However, your son survived. We found him sleeping upstairs. It seems he was asleep under the bed.